as a designee of the Minority Leader. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the topic of this special order.
Without objection, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in honor of the 2,500 unborn lives we lose to abortion each day who cannot stand for themselves. That is nearly 500,000 little boys and little girls in the United States alone this year. These numbers don't reflect, though, and take into consideration self-administered chemical abortions. Last month, the Supreme Court announced that the pro-life movement was waiting half a century to hear. Roe versus Wade is overturned. As a proud grandfather of 10, I enthusiastically applaud the justices for recognizing that this terrible relic from 1973 has no place in 2022. Roe was both a legal and moral abomination from the beginning. It mocked our nation's Constitution and paved the way for the abortion of more than 63 million innocent babies in the years since. The men who first decided Roe invented a right to abortion out of thin air. By adding an extra line to our Constitution, they ignored one of the first sentences of the Declaration of Independence, which holds that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With Roe in the dustbin of history, the abortion question returns to the democratic arena where it belongs. The most contentious of issues can now be properly debated and deliberated at both the federal and state levels, where ideally the most logical and persuasive arguments can triumph and translate into new law. Let us have clear eyes to see exactly what science shows us, that fetuses in the womb are human beings who develop with each passing second. These innocent children have their own DNA and soon develop hands, feet, eyes, and lips. They can also feel pain, and just as importantly, they have the potential to grow up and flourish and achieve amazing dreams. Let us have the compassion to give them that chance. For those of us in elected office who sincerely believe that human life is a sacred gift from God in need of society's protection, our position is no longer theoretical. We now have a pressing responsibility to examine how public policy can best be crafted to adequately accomplish our stated goal. And I believe we already have an answer. When an expectant mother visits a doctor for an ultrasound, the image of a beating heart is the first confirmation that a child has been conceived. When someone is involved in a severe accident, a medic will check right away to see if there's a pulse to make sure the victim is alive. In short, a heartbeat means a life. Now, to legislate consistently with this truth, I've introduced the Heartbeat Protection Act in the U.S. House of Representatives. This bill would legally prohibit future abortions from being performed if a preborn child's heartbeat can be detected, with the exception for when a mother's life is endangered. It is a science-based, humanity-respecting solution suited to the new landscape in which we find ourselves. The post-Roe world is here. As legislators in each state determine the extent to which they wish to defend life, pro-life members of Congress can simultaneously take action to make our beloved country a place where both children waiting to be born and their mothers are acknowledged and safeguarded. Mr. Speaker, tonight we have a very distinguished group of members with us who will also speak on this subject. This doesn't have to turn into an angry debate. This doesn't have to turn into something that people get so upset with each other that they can't even sit down and talk intelligently about what's going on. If we cannot see the value of life every day in every single person, then what have we witnessed this year, just this summer? The horror that has taken place in our own cities, the loss of life that we have experienced, the sincere sorrow that this country feels, and yet we have a blind eye and a deaf ear to the cries of the unborn? Do they not deserve that same type of consideration that every human being deserves? At this time, I'd like to have Ms. Lisa McClain from Michigan, one of our colleagues, with a bright future here in the Congress. Ms. McClain, please.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania to hold this very serious and very important special order. Thank you very much. A few weeks ago, the Supreme Court delivered the greatest victory for life this country has ever seen when it rightly upheld the ability, held that the ability to kill an unborn child is not a constitutional right and returned the authority to regulate abortion back to the people and their elected representatives. Sadly, we have seen some elected officials who care more about appeasing the fringes of their base than defending our institution and respecting the document that they swore to uphold and defend. President Biden, for an example, a former longtime supporter of letting the states decide their abortion policy. He sees fit to ignore the ruling. And in a feeble attempt to quiet his far-left critics, is seeking to unilaterally expand the ability to kill an unborn child. I'm curious, does he not know that we have a rule of law in this country with a system actually built on checks and balances? The president has been in Washington since before Roe, so I think he should at least have the basic understanding of our government and the rule of law. And I would say this, Mr. President, these efforts will be in vain. You must remember the oath that you took and the document you swore to uphold. Mr. President, the Supreme Court and the Constitution are clear. You and your bureaucratic underlings at HHS do not have the authority to unilaterally make law. That is up to the people's representative. Please remember that. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. McClain. I'd like to now recognize Dr. Bruce Babin from Texas, the great state of Texas. Brian Babin, I'm sorry. Doctor, please, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my friend from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly, for this special order. The Supreme Court's monumental overturn of Roe v. Wade is a milestone that we've been working on for nearly half a century. However, the work has only just begun. Since the court's ruling, pro-abortion extremists have attacked, vandalized, and even firebombed pregnancy centers and churches across this country. Since 2016, pregnancy help centers have saved more than 800,000 lives by providing critical resources for women and their children. They should never be forced to operate under the threat of violence from anarchists who do not value life or our laws. I've introduced House Resolution 1183, which condemns these attacks and the domestic terrorists behind them. We must keep fighting to protect the unborn from those who wish to extinguish them at all costs. I'm a proud supporter of such an effort, the Heartbeat Protection Act, which prohibits abortions from the moment a child's heartbeat is detected. All babies deserve a chance at life, and we must defend that chance and that life. My colleagues across the aisle have disturbingly embraced an anti-life agenda so radical that it sadistically enables the murder of millions. This week, our colleagues across the aisle are pushing the Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act, a bill that legalizes abortion on demand for any reason and at any time. They don't care that their pro-abortion agenda fails to align with the views of the majority of Americans, 71% to be exact, who support some limitations on abortion. We cannot and we must not remain silent while the lives of the most innocent among us are threatened to be terminated. I will always stand for our unborn and firmly stand against any efforts to promote abortion. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate your comments. Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to recognize a very good friend of mine from Pennsylvania, Dr. John Joyce, another member of the Pennsylvania Fantastic Conference Group and a strong defender of life. Doctor.
First of all, I'd like to thank Representative Mike Kelly for holding this special order. What a pivotal summer we have seen as the United States Supreme Court, after almost 5 decades, has overruled the terror of Roe v. Wade. We all know that all life is sacred. And as a doctor, I swore an oath, first, to do no harm. And for me, as a doctor, that meant refusing to ever be involved in performing abortions or any abortion procedures. Now, as a legislator, it means working each and every day to protect and stand for human life. And even after this historic Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, there is still work to be done to protect human life here in the United States. Our Declaration of Independence states that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable rights given to all of us by our Creator. And government is created to protect these rights. Government is created to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must all, as legislators, stand for life, and we must continue to fight for the unborn. The sanctity of human life is an inherent part of America from our founding days, and it must be protected today and into the future. Again, I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, my colleague and my friend, for doing this special order this evening and allowing all of America to hear how we stand behind the sanctity of human life. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you much. Dr. Joyce, great job. Thank you. Next, I'd like to have Mr. Mike Johnson from the great state of Louisiana and a big member of the Republican leadership group. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, my friend, for your important voice and for hosting this special order hour. The sanctity of human life can never be overemphasized. You've done so much work in that arena, and I really appreciate you. I'm also thankful to our Democrat colleagues tonight as well for skipping their special order hour so we can just get right ahead and get started in prime time. If America were experiencing record inflation and sky-high gas prices and uninhibited illegal immigration under our watch, you know what, I'd probably yield my time back as well. Mr. Speaker, this morning in our Judiciary Committee, the Democrat majority convened a hearing, and they entitled it, "The Threat to Individual Freedoms in a Post-Roe World." It was an appropriate title indeed, because the radical abortion advocates are becoming completely unhinged, and they are seeking to trample on the individual freedoms of anybody who disagrees with them. Case in point, over the weekend, the left-wing activist group Shut Down D.C. offered $200 bounties for public sightings of our Supreme Court justices. This week, Senator Elizabeth Warren, talk about unhinged, she said that crisis pregnancy centers all across America should be shut down. There are 2,700 pregnancy centers all around this country in all 50 states. They're supported by over 10,000 licensed medical professionals. They're annually serving approximately 2 million women and men. I used to serve as legal counsel for many of these organizations, and I can testify to their invaluable work. Why? Why would anybody want to shut down pregnancy centers? They exist to provide counseling, care, aid, and comfort to struggling mothers who just want to have their babies. It's just abhorrent. And speaking of abhorrent, I suggest to my Democrat friends to study up tonight. Really, I mean seriously, on the bill that we're going to be voting on here tomorrow. They call it the Women's Protection Act. It's not. We call it more appropriately Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act. Even though this will be the second time we voted on this bill in this Congress, I'm not sure they know what's in it, because I keep hearing my Democrat colleagues tell us, oh, no, it's just not about abortion on demand until birth. It absolutely is. Surely if they knew that this legislation did this, they wouldn't support it, right? The American people certainly don't support it. But to our Democrat colleagues tonight, as I yield back to my friend, I would just humbly suggest, you know what? Read your bill. You got a few hours. Read your legislation. Search your conscience. And I hope that you'll do the right thing and vote against that bill tomorrow. I thank my friend again for the special order hour, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'd like now to ask Mr. Doug LaMalfa. I think we came into the Congress at the same time back in 2011, and it's been a pleasure serving with you, sir. I appreciate your comments tonight on this very important issue.
Well, sir, I appreciate, Mr. Kelly, the leadership you're providing with this for us here tonight and all through the year and all through your tenure here on this key moral issue. So I'm glad to also join the rest of my pro-life colleagues here to reaffirm our dedication to protecting the innocent unborn. Indeed, we have cause for celebration that something's been corrected, that over 50 years and over 50 million lives taken, the unconstitutional Roe decision has been rightly overturned and the power put back to the states to a legislative process, not one decided by 7 of 9 on a Supreme Court. Indeed, now we can have debate, people can be accountable for their votes, the public can have input on what they really think about this topic. And so the public is much more educated at this point than they were 50 years ago on what this really means. You know, every pregnancy actually results in a human life being in that pregnancy. It's not something else. It's not a blob. It's not a tissue mass. It isn't going to be some other form of life or an animal. This is a human life we're talking about. And we value that. We protect that. It's constitutional to protect life in this country. So though that decision does not outlaw abortion, it puts the responsibility back and accountability to legislatures, whether it's going to be states or here in the U.S. Capitol even. So they still push forward anyway with a determination to go even farther than Roe v. Wade, their abortion on demand bill that they are going to take up tomorrow. It provides for discretionary abortions at any point in a pregnancy on the basis of a baby's sex, race, or possible disability. What are we doing here? We must stop this the left's radical and extreme immoral abortion agenda and uphold the value and dignity and potential of every person's life. We even see now that corporations want to pay for travel or abortions for their employees. Amazing. They think this is helping women. $4,000 by as much as possible is possible by one for your travel to go see. Now we have states also wanting to be abortion tourism centers. My home state of California shamefully is trying to draw people in, pay for their stay, pay for their travel, even for illegal immigrants. How immoral could you be? So each one of these innocent souls indeed was created by God, and we see this immoral decay of our country, and it's really coming to fruition right in bright colors in front of all of us. There's no denying what we're talking about as a human life. As early as 5 weeks in the womb, babies have a heartbeat. By 10 weeks, arms, legs, fingers, and toes. They can jump and kick even inside the womb. 15 weeks, fully developed hearts. They can taste, yawn, and hiccup. Indeed, they're real. It's not some blob. It's not something just to be dismissed. So what we're seeing here is that with the overturning of this decision, the responsibility is back in front of the people to have this debate, and it's going to be a serious debate all over all the states that are going to take this up and here in Congress. So my hat's off to all the people that have worked so hard all these years, those pro-life folks out there making the case, pleading, praying, and working so hard to educate the miracle that is life. So with that, I thank you for the time, and I yield back. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now, I'd like to have my friend come forward for 2 minutes, Mr. Glenn Grothman from the great state of Wisconsin, a strong defender and consistent defender of life. Mr. Grothman, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Our country was sent on a journey a week ago to see how we would respond to the Dobbs decision. This decision challenges all Americans to decide where they will stand on the abortion issue. It is particularly a challenge to the churches of this country, who are supposed to provide moral guidance to the country as to where to stand. These are decisions that will have to be made up of citizens in part when they vote. Decisions have to be made by state legislators, district attorneys as to whether they're going to uphold pro-life laws, and perhaps most important of all, individual decisions that are going to have to be made by women or families who are in a situation in which some people are going to try to persuade them to have an abortion. It is interesting when we talk about this to remember that in 1973, as far as I can determine, no state between California on the West Coast and New York on the East Coast had entirely open-ended pro-abortion laws. Nevertheless, at a time where we didn't really have ultrasounds, every other state ruled that something barbaric was going on. You just heard other statistics. We know that at 6 weeks a child has a heart weak, 7 weeks feels pain, 10 weeks jumps if startled and has fingers and toes, 15 weeks sense of taste. I mean, obviously anybody who says what would God want us to do in this situation realizes a human being has been created by God, and that human being should be cherished and kept alive. It was, again, apparently the clergy in 1973, or society as a whole, did a good job of informing people that something so horrific was happening in abortion that it should be barred and made illegal. Since that time, the clergy of this country and the churches of this country have had 49 years to weigh in with the public and guide them as to how they should think. We are soon going to find out what a good job they did or what a bad job they did. In any event, we thank the Supreme Court for reaching the right decision, and now we put the ball in the court of Americans as a whole, whether they will respond recognizing the precious lives that we have to protect in America, or whether we're going down the chute towards more the atheistic view of the world, countries like North Korea, Red China, countries that in which atheism is part of their roots. So the challenge is yours, America, the challenge to the churches. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grothman. Now I'd like to recognize Representative Andy Biggs from the great state of Arizona, a great defender and consistent defender of life. Mr. Biggs, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. I thank Mr. Kelly for holding this special order, and thanks for your important leadership on this incredibly important issue, particularly the heartbeat bill. And the heartbeat bill criminalizes an abortion who performs an abortion knowingly after determining that a fetus has a detectable heartbeat. Now, the Democrats have the most radical position on abortion. They have zero regard for life. It is so radical that they want to shut down all crisis pregnancy centers in America. These centers help pregnant mothers in need and after the child is born. Tomorrow they plan to pass a piece of legislation that will strip away every protection for children in the womb, the protection for their mothers and health care providers. It would allow abortion up until birth, and it could be used for sex selection. And if it is signed into law, we will become the most barbarous country in the world with regard to abortion, more radical than even China, North Korea, or Vietnam, which have no limitations. Well, what do we have now? We have states that can regulate this now, and they do. So it's a lie to say that you don't have abortion in these states. But here's the deal. Even in France, they regulate and it's prevented after 14 weeks. Germany after 12 weeks. Greece after 12 weeks. Hungary after 12 weeks. Ireland after 12. And it goes on and on in the EU. But the United States, if this bill passes tomorrow, will be the most barbarous to unborn babies in the world. I hope and pray that doesn't happen. It must not happen in a civilized country like the United States. I pray it won't, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Biggs. Now I'd like to have Mr. Tracy Mann, Representative Mann from Kansas. This is his first session in Congress. Another great defender of pro-life and consistent member of pro-life. Mr. Mann, for 2 minutes, please.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for hosting this and very important special order hour. It's hard-pressed to think of anything more important we could talk about right now. I rise tonight to use my voice in defense of the voiceless, the unborn. Abortion has desensitized our nation, and I pray that the recent Supreme Court ruling wakes up our country to the horrors that we visit upon our country's most vulnerable citizens whose lives have been snuffed out by abortion. By 12 weeks of age, a baby has a fully formed arms, hands, fingers, feet, and toes, a fully functional circulatory system and liver, and the capacity to experience pain, all at the weight of just 1 ounce and a length of 4 inches. This is a miracle of God, and rather than stand in awe of it, some lawmakers would rather disregard it as meaningless. Abortion is not simply an elective medical procedure like getting your wisdom teeth taken out. It's another person involved, another eternal soul whom God created, loves, and sent his son Jesus to die for so that they might live. The Supreme Court has finally rectified their unthinkable wrong from 50 years ago when the court legislated from the bench with Roe v. Wade and declared abortion a constitutional right grounded in a woman's right to privacy, a jurisprudential move that was shaky, biased, and flat wrong. The United States is one of only 8 countries in the world that permit abortion after 20 weeks of gestation, which means that 95% of the countries on earth think that we are dead wrong on abortion. Now, as the Supreme Court has finally handed this decision back to the states, Americans will get to decide for themselves how abortion should be regulated. It's easy to get caught up in the legislative language and forget that the numbers involved in the abortion issues are actual human beings. In the United States, 63.4 million people, Americans, have died from abortion over the last 50 years. To put that number into context, that's roughly the entire population of the Midwest, which is estimated at 65 million people. Think about that. Would our country notice if the collective populations of Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin were wiped out overnight? Would we miss these people? That's the impact that abortion has had over the past 50 years. I believe that life begins at conception, which is why I support adoptions, foster care, and crisis pregnancy centers that work tirelessly to care for mothers and their babies. I want to take a moment to thank the pro-life movement at large in America, and I'm standing with you and thanking God that Roe v. Wade has finally been overturned. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Mann. At this time, I'd like to have Representative Louis Gohmert from the great state of Texas, and somebody who's been a friend of mine since way back in 2011, and you have never stopped fighting for life since you've got here, sir. Thank you so much, and please take 2 minutes.
And thank you, my friend, for having and hosting this time. During biblical times, we read about sacrifices of babies to Moloch, to Baal. How could that happen? How could you allow a child, a tiny baby, to suffer like that? But it goes on. And I know there's so much said, but let's simplify it. If you think that's not a child, see a preemie. Doesn't have to be your own premature child like ours was. And let that little child grab your finger and hold on for dear life. And understand what we've heard testimony here about what a late-term abortion is, that so many in this body embrace. That little hand is attached to an arm that's attached to a body, and that's a beautiful child. And the late-term abortionist, as he's explained, will rip off, it reaches in with a clamp, clamps onto the arm, linear things, and rips off 4 linear things from the body, and then reaches in and crushes the skull and rips the skull off of the child. That is not progress for civilization. That is horrendous. Let a premature child, hold your finger and see what the monitors do, as I have. And you'll never, ever want to know of a child like that being broken and pulled and torn apart. Let's progress beyond the brutality. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gohmert. At this point right now, I'd like to introduce Representative Buddy Carter from the great state of Georgia. Again, another great defender of life. And I think one of the things we have to realize tonight is we have been defending life for so long and with such great patience and with such great prayer. It has always been done in a peaceful manner. I appreciate you being here. Mr. Carter, please, 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, in the 1970s, when Roe versus Wade was decided, ultrasound technology was in its infancy. The black and white photos that expectant parents proudly display on their refrigerators and in social media posts today, they weren't widely available back then. The general public could not see the life that was being created, and the medical community had no clear consensus on when life began. I've been blessed with many beautiful grandchildren, and I remember the warmth and love I felt for them the second I saw those 15-week ultrasound photos. I'm beyond grateful. In fact, it's an answer to many prayers that our Supreme Court has finally made a decision and has overturned the catastrophic decision that was Roe versus Wade. What the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization decision does is give the power back to the states where it belongs, allowing them to decide how they want to approach abortion law. But it doesn't stop here. We must now refocus our attention in a post-Roe world to providing aid to our mothers. Now, this is very important, Mr. Speaker. The Biden administration has recently come out targeting pharmacists such as myself, trying to force them to distribute abortion medication at the risk of civil rights violations. When I was a member of the Georgia State Legislature, I sponsored legislation to allow pharmacists to act in the best interest of their patient. President Biden is using pharmacists as political pawns for his pro-abortion agenda. That is truly despicable. This is not the kind of leadership that should be coming out of the White House. Life is the most fundamental human right. We must continue to work to help make the best that it can be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. At this time, I'd like to welcome Representative Rick Allen, also from the great state of Georgia. And again, thank you for being with us tonight, Representative. As a big defender of life, thank you so much, and please take 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, my friend Mike Kelly from Pennsylvania. Mr. Speaker, I believe everyone has the dignity, value, and potential. There is no right more fundamental than the right to life. Our founders engraved it in the Constitution. We are made in God's image, and we carry in our hearts that spark of creation that served as the bedrock upon which our country was founded. Documents like the Constitution do not grant rights, they protect rights. The Dobbs versus Jackson decision will go down in history not only as the end of one era, but the dawn of another, more hopeful one. The decision that the court made was based on the 14th Amendment and the civil rights of a woman and her reproductive rights. The decision was controversial. It's not in the Constitution, and it was a terrible decision. It was decided based on the civil rights of the mother. We know that the child has a heartbeat in 6 weeks and can feel pain in 15 weeks, which was the Mississippi law that it was contested on. And we know a child born at 24 weeks will survive. My question is, when does that child enjoy the same rights under the 14th Amendment as the mother? Is it at conception, 6 weeks, heartbeat, which the Georgia law is based on, or is it the Mississippi law, or when that child is born maybe prematurely at 24 weeks? This is God's word, God told Jeremiah that he knew him before he webbed him in the womb. What my colleagues are proposing tomorrow on the House floor goes far beyond Roe. This legislation, if codified into law, would require health care providers at the command of the mother to rip a full-term baby from the womb while the mother is in labor, and if the baby likely survives, orders the child to be killed. This is unconscionable and barbaric and must be stopped. Only 8 nations, as said earlier, allow this barbaric practice. They are North Korea, two of them are North Korea and China. We are not in good company here. I cry out to my colleagues to stop this insanity. Let us all enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, even the defenseless unborn. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. I appreciate your remarks. Tomorrow is a big day for all of us. Yes, at this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Michael Guest from the great state of Mississippi. And as we all ponder tonight what tomorrow will bring, Mr. Guest, thank you so much for being with us tonight and defending life in every step of the way. Thank you so much, sir. 2 minutes, please.
I rise today in support of the life of the unborn and in support of pro-life legislation like the Heartbeat Protection Act, a common sense bill that would save untold number of unborn children. I encourage my colleagues to look at the evidence that supports the pro-life movement. I know that Scripture supports life. Jeremiah 1:15 tells us, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." We also know that science supports life. Science now proves that children can feel pain starting at 15 weeks or earlier, unborn children. With enhanced ultrasound technology, we see children in the room moving and kicking. With new technology, doctors can even detect the beating sound of a child's heart. Our court supports life with the recent decision by the court to support Dobbs v. Jackson, a case that originated in the great state of Mississippi, my home state. We now have a legal system that has opened the door for a wave of pro-life support. And the American people also support life. Almost 2 out of every 3 Americans support restrictions on abortion. 21 states have already implemented laws to protect the lives of unborn children, and that will now grow even further, with 9 more states considering their own pro-life legislation in the coming months. I urge my colleagues to support Scripture, science, our legal systems, our states, the American people, and the lives of our unborn children by supporting the pro-life movement. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Guest. Appreciate your comments. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative John Rose from the great state of Tennessee. Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Representative Kelly, for sponsoring this special order tonight. Mr. Speaker, on Friday of last week, President Biden signed an executive order undermining democratically passed state laws that limit abortions. His executive order directs the Department of Health and Human Services to protect access to life-ending abortions, including the dangerous and deadly chemical abortion pill. This goes directly against the Supreme Court's recent decision that allows the people, through their elected representatives, to decide on this issue for themselves at the many states. Unfortunately, the president caved to the extremists that support abortion up until the moment of birth and is now going against his oath of office by directly undermining the law of the land. Meanwhile, pregnancy centers, which provide compassionate support to pregnant mothers, and churches are under attack by the left, which is where is the executive order protecting these organizations and institutions? In America, the first unalienable right is the right to be born, the right to life. Countless lives have been lost to abortion since Roe became law. Now is our time to right these wrongs and stand for life. The President has a constitutional duty to uphold the law of the land, not undermine it. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Rose. Appreciate you being here tonight. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your indulgence. And I think I will use some of the time that we have left. I know that we always want to debate this proposed legislation about what's good about it, what's bad about it, and oftentimes we use languages to actually disguise what it is that we're actually talking about. Tomorrow, as we will debate and vote on the Women's Health Protection Act, abortion is the only medical procedure where two people go into the doctor's office and only one comes out alive. And I know that in this House, in the people's House, we have had debate, heavy debate, and I know that both sides are divided on it, and sometimes the language gets out of hand. It gets too hateful. My colleagues on the other side have often said to me, look, we believe like you believe. We believe that life is sacred. We believe that every child has a chance. That unborn child is waiting to be born, waiting to experience all that life has to offer. But you see, the Supreme Court took that option away from me. My personal preference would be life, but the Supreme Court took that option away from me. So tomorrow, as we debate the Women's Health Protection Act, and we hear a lot of discussion that goes back and forth and defending and then tearing apart and people adding to and subtracting from, we come to a lot of different things. I just want to share with you, last weekend while we were home, I had the opportunity to visit in Erie, Pennsylvania. This is in the district that I represent. I visited a women's care center, and this is a center where too often they're described as people who are trying to discourage pregnant mothers from actually giving birth. They're trying to lead them in think they're leading them in a different direction. I just want to say this, the people that man these agencies give up a day of their life to come in and help counsel people, women, who are going probably through some of the most difficult times of their life. Maybe it's not the right time for them to have that child. Maybe there's a financial problem with it and say, it's just not right now. Maybe there's something else that stands in their way and saying, well, I'm so alone, I'm by myself. I don't know how I would handle this. And to those ladies who go through that, I would say there is options available to you. The adoption option is there. We got thousands upon thousands of people who would love to adopt a child, to give it a loving home, to help nurture it as it goes through its life cycles. We also have foster care that's available. And I know that I've talked to too many women who have experienced the anguish of going through an abortion and then later on thinking they made the biggest mistake of their life and holding that guilt feeling in their life. And I would just like to suggest that we are a very forgiving society. We are a people who say, look, don't let that ruin your life. Don't let that ruin your life. There is forgiveness, there is grace, there is mercy. We know that. But as we stand here tonight in the people's house, how do we ever get to this point? How do we ever, in the United States of America, decide that all life is not precious? I mentioned earlier some of the horrific instances have taken place just in the last few weeks, in the last few months, in the last few years. I know that on Wednesdays, a lot of representatives wear red, and that's to bring about the remembrance of the Boko Haram and the little girls that were kidnapped and never returned. And it's always about, we need to get our girls back. We have such open hearts, and we have such understanding in some cases, and then in other cases, we just close our eyes. We plug our ears. We say, no, you don't understand. In this situation, the conception of that child was not what we were looking for. That's not what we wanted, but it happened. And now we have a problem. A problem. What are we going to do with this little girl or this little boy. And I know people look away and they look to the sky and they look to the walls and they look to the floor and they say, look, my personal preference would be, but the Supreme Court made a decision. The Supreme Court has just righted a very wrong decision. I would hope that at some point, the greatest defender of life in the history of the world, the greatest defender of liberty and freedom in the history of the world, the United States of America, would take a look at the course and the direction it has been taking for the last 50 years. Millions upon millions upon millions of little boys and little girls have been denied the right to life. Where in our history did we ever come up with this idea that abortion is okay? Look, I said earlier, I understand there's times in your life. I can just tell you this, as a father of 4 and a grandfather of 10, between our firstborn child and our secondborn child, there was a pregnancy that took place. It was an ectopic pregnancy. My wife has wondered forever, what would that child have been like had she gone full term? I just want to take a moment, Mr. Speaker, as we close now. In this building, in this room, in this town, tomorrow, we will have a chance to look at what it is we are doing and where we are going. I would just ask it all. Be prayerful, be peaceful, and understand that this is an issue that we can no longer close our eyes to. If it is your personal preference, if it is something that you think is right for life, then please walk away from any political bend that you may have and look at the policy. We're here for the best interest of the United States and the best interest of our American citizens. Mr. Speaker, I thank you so much again for your indulgence, and I yield back any remaining time that I may have.
The gentleman yields back. And under the